In this episode titled Medal for a Hero of the private eye thriller Mannix, our main character, private investigator Joe Mannix, attempts to solve the mystery behind Officer Marcus Fair's untimely death amidst a heist gone wrong. Marcus's death awarded him the Medal of Honor, but his allegiance comes into question when his name was found on a list along with other officers who were paid off at the time of the heist. His son Toby is devastated by the accusations, which gives Mannix enough of a reason to take on the case. The show wants viewers to question whether or not Marcus was in on the heist all along, or if he was truly trying to save the day but sadly lost his life in the process. During Mannix's investigation, he finds a code within Marcus's daybook. It is revealed that his partner, Warren Hoxie, was the true dirty cop involved in the heist. Once Mannix confronts Hoxie with Marcus's murder, Hoxie reveals that he didn't kill his partner, but rather just did not save him. The last act consists of a shootout between two parties, L.B. Ogilvy and Officer Heineman, the true culprits, against Mannix and Lieutenant Larry Burdett. At the end of the day, Mannix was able to solve the case for Toby, reassuring him that his father was in fact a fallen hero deserving of his medal. In the pilot episode for Columbo, Murder by the Book, directed by Steven Spielberg of all people, Lieutenant Columbo is trying to solve what happened to Jim Ferris. Jim and Ken Franklin were two halves of the Mrs. Melville mystery novel series. The first 15 minutes of the episode consists of Ken manipulating Jim to get away from his office and accompany him to his lake house. Throughout this montage, Ken does numerous shady things like trashing Jim's office, planting false evidence, lying to Jim's wife Joanne about Jim, and getting Jim to lie to Joanne himself about his whereabouts. Ken is going through all this trouble because Jim wanted to go solo with his writing career. The climax of his efforts resulted in Ken shooting and killing Jim while he was on the phone with Joanne. Lieutenant Columbo is then introduced when Joanne and the police find the trashed office. He cares for Joanne by taking her back home and cooking her a meal, learning information about the writing duo in the process. Soon after, Ken arrives, and Columbo is left with an eerie feeling towards Ken. The so-called author was very aggressive towards Columbo from the very start, all because he was extremely confident in the alibi he had manufactured previously during the montage. As Ken continued to execute his plan, he would come across the lieutenant countless other times trying to throw him off of his scent. But as Ken got comfortable, he got sloppy. He was blackmailed by Lily Lysenka, a shopkeeper who knew for a fact that Ken had committed the murder. He was only able to throw off Columbo for so long with the help of the false information Ken had presented him, but things started to crumble when he murdered Lily as well. Due to some tricky investigative work based on a couple of hunches, Lieutenant Columbo figured it out and got a confession from Ken himself to both murders. Before Lieutenant Burdett and Mannix were fighting together hand in hand, Burdett was at Mannix's throat from the start. He even wanted to get Mannix's PI license revoked for interfering with police matters. Most of their interactions together throughout the episode consisted of the lieutenant aggressively bashing or insulting Mannix just for being a PI. He is not given the same respect Burdett would give to a police officer because in his eyes, Mannix is only a pest lurking around actual police work. Although some could argue Burdett may have a right to think Mannix is only getting in the way, Lieutenant Burdett had practically convicted Marcus of being a dirty cop before finding any evidence or concrete facts. Mannix knew there had to be more to the story and effectively solved the case on his own, even with Lieutenant Burdett getting in the way rather than vice versa. Burdett even killed a key witness after Mannix told him not to shoot, making the investigation that much harder. In the end, Lieutenant was able to find a new respect for Joe Mannix, but every step of the way, Burdett continuously hindered the case and almost pinned a crime against an innocent man. Before we ever even see Columbo, two officers are bombarding Joanne with questions without any regard for her sake. Columbo is a major contrast to the officers as he makes the effort to care for Joanne, acting as some sort of savior for her. The audience learns that Columbo has a kind nature and Ken uses this as an excuse to belittle the man. He treats Columbo as a bumbling idiot who is incapable of solving his own cases, even going as far as to say he needs to learn a thing or two from Mrs. Melville Melville, his fictional character that he doesn't even write the stories for. Besides insulting Columbo, as previously mentioned, Ken loves sending him on wild goose chases like he's a child. Throughout the episode, it's clear Columbo is catching on to him, which makes it all the more satisfying when he catches Ken and gets him to admit to Jim and Lily's murders. Adding even more salt to Ken's wound, Columbo took a piece of Ken's advice and was able to solve the case using the help of Mrs. Melville after all. Besides Mannix being the main character in his own series, the central characters of this episode are Marcus and his son Toby. As previously mentioned, this case is very personal to Mannix, and he wants to find out the truth for Toby, who is left wondering if the rumors of his father being dirty are really true. Mannix even refers to Toby as his client when talking to Ogilvy.
I've already got a client. Who? Well, I don't think you'd know Mr. Ogilvy. He's only 8 years old.
Before we find out the truth, the episode provides two separate stories of the events that unfolded the night of the heist. In one, Marcus is the crooked cop double-crossing the burglars, and in the other, Marcus is the hero trying to save the day. Toby lost his dad in a tragic accident and was then told his father died a crook instead of a hero. The medal given to his dad that Toby cherishes so much is now tainted, making the boy the emotional core of the story. Murder by the Book tells the story of how Columbo solved the mystery, yes, but it also tells the story of a falling out between partners, as well as the story of a rotten, greedy man. I would argue that Ken is the episode's main character, and that he gets most of the screen time. His intense disdain for Jim led himself to recreate his old idea for a Mrs. Melville novel in real life.
Idea for a Melville book, perfect alibi. A wants to kill B. Drives B to a remote house and has him call his wife in city. Tells her he's working late at the office. Bang, bang.
He was very careful at the beginning, but things changed as time went on. Columbo even said it himself. The first murder was smart. The second was downright sloppy. It was Ken's ego that proved his guilt, and his confidence is what got him caught in the first place. In his mind, there was no way in hell the joyful idiot Columbo would be able to solve the mystery in the end. In many cases, police and people with power unfortunately do not always handle things by the book, and take alternative steps to solve a problem instead. The same can also be said for Mannix, but not to the extent you might think. Thinking like Lieutenant Burdett, sure, Mannix was actively interfering with a police investigation, speaking to witnesses which led to Hoxie fleeing, as well as withholding evidence. But Mannix understood that Lieutenant Burdett was only getting in the way, and the only way he was going to find the truth was to use methods off the book. Much like Mannix, Lieutenant Columbo does step outside the barriers of normal procedure. However, Columbo is very tricky with his tactics, nor does he outright engage in criminal behavior. The main example of Columbo bending the rules comes near the end when he enters Jim's office without a warrant, denying movers entry in the process. This isn't necessarily illegal, as Columbo's authority is never really tested, but not necessarily right morally, even if the audience and Columbo both know what Ken had done. This is not the only instance of Columbo being exactly where he needs to be either. Backing up a little, Columbo visits Ken at his lake house and lets himself into his home, exclaiming the door was just unlocked. There he questions Ken about the death of Lily, at which Ken claims he barely knew her. Later, Columbo visits Lily's shop and asks the officers there if he can take a look around despite it being out of his jurisdiction. There, he found a signed book given to Lily by Ken, connecting him to the murder. Both are more instances of Columbo straying away from normal procedure because no one is questioning his authority to be there, allowing him to make discoveries. In both Mannix and Columbo, police are effectively treated as oafs, whether directly or indirectly. Lieutenant Burdett was in part an antagonist and an obstacle for Mannix to overcome. He had the wrong facts, made the wrong decisions, and constantly dug himself into a hole. He's more of a cartoon villain, getting in the way rather than a decorated police lieutenant, while Mannix is portrayed as the story's misunderstood James Bond, here to save the day. Although not the antagonist, Lieutenant Columbo faces the same issue, and as previously mentioned, he is treated as a bumbling buffoon by Ken due to his unassuming nature. Columbo plays along with this idea because he knew it would bring down Ken's guard and give himself a chance to catch him. In each interaction between the two, Columbo allows Ken to berate him until he finally slipped up. Despite it being directly or indirectly, the police are seen as unhelpful oafs who flat out get in the way or are too stupid to solve a damn thing. Both Mannix, a private investigator, and Columbo, a lieutenant, were seen as lesser by those who held themselves in a higher regard. The egos of Lieutenant Burdett and Ken Franklin are strikingly similar, despite one being a psychotic murderer. Oh wait, they both are. In conclusion, both Mannix, Medal for a Hero, and Columbo, Murder by the Book, share a glimpse into the lives of law enforcement behind the overarching narrative. Despite the backlash Mannix and Columbo face during their investigations, they end up solving the case. But do they really save the day? Both Marcus Fair and Jim Ferris lost their lives from the very start. But my answer would still be yes. Despite their investigations bending the thin blue line, Mannix was able to prove to Toby that his dad was a true hero, and Columbo was able to give closure to Joanne whilst catching his murderer.